Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Larry King. Larry King, as many of you may know, was a very renowned, prolific talk show host. He was certainly not afraid to ask the tough questions. And first, I want to talk a little bit about it's just basic elements, points in his chart, and then I'm going to talk about, perhaps some, well, not perhaps, I'm going to talk about what I believe are placements natally and transits that might have been tied into his passing. Now, looking at his natal chart, well, he does, he has a sun in Scorpio, moon in Sagittarius, and Capricorn rising. And the thing about this is being a sun in Scorpio, a lot of basic characters being about very incisive and probing, and then you have the moon in Sagittarius done perhaps in a very blunt, sometimes even tactless manner, very fearless manner. Sometimes it could be to the point of maybe demoralizing the person he's talking to, but he certainly was not afraid to ask the hard questions, and credit to him for that. And being flavored with the Capricorn ascendant, a lot of this being done, of course, with a lot of diligence, structure, and discipline and consistency, and a lot of seriousness as well. And I think he was 87 when he passed away. And the first thing is, there's the cause of death, my understanding, has not been confirmed at the time I made this, making this video. He had recently been treated for COVID-19. He does have the transit Pluto in the first house. Pluto, of course, is connected with death. First house is the physical body. Pluto is also associated with viruses. And having a sun in Scorpio, there can be some more susceptibility to that than many others, because Scorpio, I would say, is the sign associated with viruses, since Pluto is connected with them, and Pluto, of course, does rule Scorpio. And other things too that he's experiencing. Now, the transit, I want to talk about the transit of Pluto. Now, the thing about that is, what's interesting, he appears to be a cardinal, I should say cardinal grand cross configuration, consisting of the ascendant and ascendant in Capricorn, the Uranus in Aries, Pluto in Cancer, in Jupiter in Libra. And the thing about this is, looking at this, the fact that transit Pluto is that it really is activating this, because what's happening is transit Pluto is opposing his natal Pluto. When you have whether it's a transit that's hitting, like if somebody were to have a T-square configuration and the point opposite of that focal point was being opposed, that could be a significant time. But I would say significant events could happen when you have a cardinal, like you have a grand cross configuration activated. So now, looking at this, I understand that Pluto by transit may not be considered to be squaring Jupiter or conjoining his natal ascendant, but at the same time it is making an opposition to his natal Pluto. So when you still have that a point that's being aspected by a transit planet, especially I would say a generational planet like Pluto, a point in that configuration being aspected by a transiting planet, it's still, I would say, it could spur on some kind of significant events. Pluto is the planet connected with death, opposing his own natal Pluto associated with death. So those are some things that I'm looking at in terms of any issues, that I should say, any transits that are tied in to his sadly passing. Now, another thing that I'm looking at as well in his chart is that he does, you have the ruler of the third house and the 12th, which could give, the third house is connected with breathing. And when you have, I mean, the ruler of that being the 12th house of restrictions can indicate perhaps some issues, some restrictions associated with breathing. Now, another thing with him as well is that, looking at this, he did have at the time of his passing, it looks like the transit, I'm trying to see his chart, bear with me people, the transit of the south node had passed his, it well made a separating conjunction from his moon. Now when you have, and I know you're looking at maybe, 7, based on the position, like 7-degree separating conjunction, and that would not be considered a conjunction by transit aspect, but the fact that it had separated in some recent time could have been an indicator that the spirit may have been leaving. The moon can be connected with the spirit, and the fact that it's in Sagittarius, one that we could say, one that could be very jocular, exuberant, expansive, and very optimistic, which is interesting, which of course would be a very much a contrast from his sun and ascendant placements. Sun in Scorpio doesn't take many things lightly, and having the ascendant in Capricorn, you're talking about the very outward, very stern and serious disposition, to say the least. Now at this time he was also going through his Saturn return in the first house of the physical body, so there may have been some issues that he might have been dealing with physically, as far as maybe circulation or something with the ankles or the shins or the calves. There might have been some problems with the lower legs, perhaps. So anyway, now another thing, looking at his chart as well, and I'm just trying, bear with me again, people, just trying to move this up a little and see his transits he had at this time. Now another thing, looking at his chart as well, Virgo on the cusp of the 8th house puts that ruler of the 8th house in the 10th house, so it's not surprising that he had a death that was going to gain some notoriety, attention, and recognition and exposure. It's also that ruler Mercury is conjunct his sun in Scorpio, so that's shining really, that's adding extra spotlight to this. Now in Scorpio, ironically enough, of course, being the sign associated with death. Now another, in having that sun and Mercury conjunction in his 10th house, it's not really that bewildering that he was able to shine in communication where it was very probing, incisive, incite, maybe even provocative ones, communications, conversations, and something that was tied in the 10th house with his career, and again gained a lot of notoriety, exposure, and recognition. And another thing too, looking at his chart, something else is that he had he has Taurus on the cusp of the 4th house, so having the by itself could indicate the end of the life, the latter part of life could be very peaceful and tranquil, but that ruler falls in the 12th house of sorrow, we could say secret sorrows, and it's really in restrictions, and it indicates that there were obviously some restrictions at the end or latter part of life. Now a lot of people have that regardless of astrological placements, because when people get older, of course, they could succumb to more debilitations, they're more susceptible to health related matters. I don't know this factually, if when people when people get older, say like 60 and older, does the immune system naturally weaken? Does it dissipate? I would think it likely does. But it's more emphasis, if you have a placement that's an indicator of that, that could even, I would say, intensify that more and increase the propensity for what I just described. Now, another thing too, it's interesting, is that he had the transit of Neptune in Pisces in the 2nd house. Now, it really doesn't seem like that's that significant in terms of, this maybe being the coronavirus. It's still speculative that he passed away because of that, but I'm highly suspicious that it did, it factored in. And the second house is the house of self-esteem and self-worth. Neptune can be connected with diseases, and Pisces can be ones that can't be eradicated. I don't know if you really if you consider this one technically one that can't be eradicated. I would say it still is, because the vaccine, even if you were to say a vaccine was 100% effective, if it was flawless or infallible in its effectiveness, you might say it is, but it is not. The vaccines that are out now, the Pfizer and Moderna, are between like 94-95% effective, so we can still consider this a disease, at least that can't be completely eradicated. The fact that it's Neptune Pisces transiting the second house, surely, whether he showed it or not, may have likely had an effect on his self-esteem, self-worth, and he probably was causing, a lot of issues, dealing with and not being able to do a lot of the things that he didn't want to do. And it would be very tough considering, Sun in Scorpio, Moon in Sagittarius, the Sun in Scorpio, of course, the soul, the Sun could be the soul. That's a very indomitable soul and will. And then the fact, Sun, Scorpio people can fight death to the bitter end. And then you have the Moon in Sagittarius, which is, maybe at least on an unconscious level, or even gaining some public recognition for being maybe that incorrigible optimist. So there's really, and it's just really sad that he did have to experience, something of this nature and thing, and it's just a terrible, terrible tragedy when you look at when you look at something like this, that somebody had to, somebody passing away at such, at least he did live a very full life. I think like 87 years old. Capricorn on the ascendant. It's not that surprising, because Capricorns, I would say, may unequivocally be the longest living zodiac sign. It is associated with Saturn, and they are about aging, and probably aged very gracefully. I'm just looking now, he does have Neptune in his 8th house in his natal chart, and that could be a death due to a disease. And it's really, again, not to be redundant, it just really, it's really terrible, and very, very tragic. And I'm sure there's a lot of people, at this point in time that are, looking at this and saying, are devastated. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else in his chart that can indicate anything connected with his passing. He may have died in his home. He does have Pluto and Cancer. I know that's generational, but it still can apply in some instances, I would say. And I'm looking right now, he has an inconjunct aspect, looks like, between his Mars. His Mars is at 0 degrees Capricorn, and the Pluto is, it would be a long inconjunct aspect, you could say, between Pluto and his Mars. And inconjuncts in astrology, as many of you may know, can be about adjustments, but can also be about health-related issues as well. And the fact, if you have Mars and Capricorn being involved, there may have been some issues that he might have had to deal with, like being with the bones, or the skin, the joints, the knees, the hamstrings. Mars also falls in his 12th house of limitations and restrictions. And being along inconjunct to Pluto, there might have been some surgery that might have been tied in with this. It would not surprise me if that's something that, I don't know if it's been, revealed on Wikipedia or what have you, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were some issues connected with that. Hold on a moment, people. But anyways, really not much more, to get at as far as this goes. And The only thing is, when he first got the COVID-19, and I don't know 100% if he died from that, but when this actually first happened, I think he had the transit sun was either conjunct the 12th house cusp from the 11th, or was actually situated in his 12th house cusp. That could be an indicator of the life leaving, even though, because the sun could be about life, of course, and you're looking at, and the 12th house is about endings, restrictions, limitations. In the first house, right now, in his natal chart. And the thing, too, is another thing I wanted to mention. I did notice that he does have Jupiter. Transit Jupiter looks like it is conjoining his natal Saturn. So, if that being the case, the transit Jupiter right now and then his natal Saturn are very at least a long conjunction to his natal Saturn, and that can enlarge uh, difficulties in some cases. That could be Aquarius related, and I don't know if he had them or not, but I mean, they could be, again, it might have been something with circulation or calves or ankles, the lower legs, shins, even nerves. And another thing that I'm noticing too is that transit Mercury looks like it is conjoining his natal North Node in Aquarius. And when you have transit like that, I mean, you're talking about at this time, Mercury, is about, it could be about breathing. You have the North Node is about, matters. When you have transits that involve the North Node, it could manifest in matters that one may have to confront or address. It's in the first house of the physical body. It might have been some erratic breathing issues he might have been dealing with, or there was something about communication regarding news about his future and the physical body, and as far in his vitality, his energy. So anyway, and also too, it looks like, transit Mercury at this time as well. Looks like it was making in conjunct to the Pluto, to his natal Pluto as well. And as I've talked about before, in conjuncts can be also about health related issues, so it might be intensifying some health related issue that was tied in to his breathing, maybe his nerves, perhaps. And Mercury is also connected, associated of course with the arms and the hands as well, so there might have been some problems with that. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying, stay well.